Hello, and welcome to The Unseen. It's time for real conversations with real people, breaking down the world of education.
Hello, community, and welcome, or better yet, welcome back. Your community resource for helping shed light on the unseen topics of education is why we are here. How are you today, Mr. Cesar?
I'm great. How's it going for you?
It is crazy. For those of you that don't know, we have 3 kids under 5 at home in kindergarten and 5th birthdays and 1st birthdays and housewarmings and
Hey,
all kinds of things. So
parenting never stops. That's
it
all I
never
know.
stops.
It's
It's
24/7,
nuts.
365.
Yeah, it doesn't help when you're both in the choice movement and everybody's everywhere, right?
So, yeah, welcome everybody to episode 2, season 1, The Birth of the Choice Movement. You know, a lot of times folks ask us, what is school choice? And so today we'll break it down and really take a deep dive into what the choice movement is all about. But choice programs give parents really the opportunity to take control over their child's education and pursue really the most appropriate education environment for them. Bottom line, right? So just like when you go to a store and you go and pick some cups, you want choice. When you go to a restaurant, you want choice. You don't always want to eat one thing, right? So in education, the school choice program sets to give parents that control to make the best educational choice for their child.
And so, with that being said, that's all the facts and the Webster definition. What's Caesar's definition of choice? If somebody comes up to you and says, "So, I know you're with this my school options thing,
Yeah,
and you guys are about choice and da da da," but
yeah.
what is choice to you, or like why are you in this? I know we talked about that somewhat already, but what's Caesar's definition for choice?
As I finished off the last episode, I stated how I believe that education is that great equalizer and really the key to an opportunity for our children. And it is with that I believe that is what education choice is all about. Making sure that we are placing our children in the best opportunity to succeed going forward. And so it is about empowering families. It is about sharing information.
Right.
It is about feeling comfortable in talking about education. That's what choice is about to me.
Right. And my thing is one size doesn't always fit all.
No,
And as you well know, as a parent, each kid has their own personality. And each
my,
kid, even though some things are the same, a lot of things aren't. And so for me, that's what choice is about, is for fitting those qualities that aren't the same,
yeah,
even within your own kids.
yeah, yeah.
And if my 3 are different, I know with all of the children that are in the state of Indiana,
hmm
they're all different as well.
hmm
So I think that that's what choice means for me, is it's fitting those unique qualities in our kids, not just trying to get all of them to fit certain criteria.
And when we also speak on choice, right, as an organization, we are not in really against any type of choice, right? We
Mm-mm.
support a parent's ability to make the best choice possible. So whether it's a traditional public school system, whether it's a charter school, whether it's a magnet school, whether it's another specialized program, whether your child, as you mentioned, right? No child is the same.
Mm-mm.
And so it is with that lens that we say, give the parents the information to make the best choice for their child.
Okay, community, today on The Unseen, we have an absolute, in my opinion, star-studded guest, Ted Green. He was a newspaper sports journalist for 20 years in the Indianapolis area, as well as Cincinnati and with the Miami Herald. In the 3 years between leaving Miami and starting at the Indianapolis Star, he had the most important job ever, in my opinion, as a stay-at-home dad of his twin girls. So in his current life, he produces film, and he wrote and narrated The Addicts, the school that opened a city. which is what introduced me to Ted and what led me to ask him to join us today. It is with that we will welcome Ted to the unseen. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Star-studded is a word that is often associated with me.
Well, in my opinion, it is. And you had too many awards here in our little intro time to list, but in my opinion, you are definitely celebrated, and I hope with many more to come.
Well, that's very, very kind of you, and I appreciate you having me on your show.
So let's get into it.
All right.
Tell me about what led to the creation and storytelling of Addicts and the history of the African American population in Indianapolis around that time frame.
Well, I'll tell you what. It was interesting. It really started in 2005 while I was working at the Indianapolis Star, and we wanted to do a big celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Crispus Attucks basketball team becoming the first all-black team anywhere in the nation to win a state basketball championship. So, for the 50th anniversary, everybody wants to do a big splash, and we did.
Right.
And but that also, kind of the neatest part of that is it led to a town hall discussion at the historic Crispus Attucks auditorium. So, I had never done anything like that before.
Right.
I was a newspaper guy. I didn't know anything about events. So, I show up early and I'm really nervous. I'm thinking, no one's going to come.
Right.
Oscar Robertson was supposed to be on the panel. I figured maybe Oscar wouldn't come. It was all going to blow up. Anyway, so I'm just wandering the halls. And, if you've ever been to Addicts, you know that one of the coolest things about it is they have all of the graduation photos from the first graduating class in 1928 on along the walls. And these are these big old pictures, and everybody's just dressed up super nicely from 28, 29, 30, all the way up. And as I was walking the halls nervous, I noticed that a lot of more and more graduates were coming, and they were coming in early too, and often with their children.
Mm.
Only what they were doing is they were walking the halls and they were pointing out relatives on those pictures, and they'd say, hey, grab their kid and say, look, there's your grandma, and there's your grandfather. And then they'd walk back about 20 pictures, and they'd say, and there's your great-grandma, and there's your great-grandma,
Right.
and there's your great-uncle. And the more I watched this, really, the more I thought, you know what, I missed the bigger story.
Right.
The basketball story for Addicts is amazing. Those guys, I know a lot of those guys, wonderful people. What they did is absolutely historic, was critically important, I think, in helping bring the city together. But I just think the bigger picture is the school itself. And because I think that Crispus Attucks, as the only school in which African Americans could attend for years and years and years, it really stood as sort of a microcosm of the African American condition in Indiana, I would argue, for most of the 20th century. And I just thought, someday I'm going to go back and I want to learn the real story. So about 10 years later, I had switched jobs and I was making films, and I thought, well, this is the time. It was coming upon the bicentennial of the state,
Mm-hmm.
and I noticed that there wasn't anything being done on that, and I thought, this is the time to shine the light on what I think is such a triumph of the human spirit. And so that's what I did. It took about 2 years of production. It certainly wasn't just me. It was my wonderful partners at WFYI and many others. And, we learned so much, and we were so fortunate to get a lot of help from people in the city who helped pay for it.
Right.
And we're so fortunate it became that the Addicks elders, I would call them, and they really embraced this idea. And we were able to put out something that I hope will sort of stand the test of time.
And what was so unique to being in one of the screenings of the film for me was there were so many alum there that were sharing about their experiences and running into classmates they hadn't seen in years, and just that feel of viewing that film was different than any studio picture I've ever been to see. Of course, You have your superhero fanatics, but it just didn't quite compare to the human element of that film and the pride of the alum of Addicts.
That was the neatest thing. I'll never forget that those first two um, screenings. Here we are at the Madam Walker Theater,
Right,
which opened the same year the Crispus Attucks opened.
right,
Along Indiana Avenue, and so many people were there. I mean, people who graduated, people who were in their 90s, a few people who were over 100 years old.
right.
And the love and the respect. One thing though drove me nuts. Like whenever a great teacher or somebody appeared on the screen, like a John Morton Finney or whatnot, everybody would cheer, and I'm like, no, you're missing my really important narrative here.
That
But
isn't the real star.
no, I mean it was it really was something.
In your opinion, what do you feel the Addict story sheds light on in regards to just kind of educational history and especially for the African American community? I know we've talked about pride in being an alum, but just kind of from the historical standpoint of education at the time, what do you think the film sheds light on the most?
I think Addicts meant everything to the African American community, and what it meant was opportunity. And even though the school, was in so many ways, built by the white community and built to fail, and built against the wishes of the African American community who did not want to be separated, nonetheless, it offered a real opportunity for the first time, and the community took it and ran with it. I mean, here's what I'd like people to think about is that before 1927, in the few years before 1927, there were about 800 black students in the three Indianapolis high schools, Shortridge and Manual and Tech.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these kids, you know what they did? They sat at the back of the class. They were never called on. They weren't allowed to participate in contact sports. They weren't allowed to participate in student government. They just weren't allowed to participate, basically, period. They were just there because the white schools had to let them in.
Right.
Well, you know what that does to a kid. I mean, if they're not ever called on, if they're not asked to participate, they're just going to sit there. That's what I would have done.
Right.
Now, Addicts opens 1927. And picture what it's like. Here are these kids who are used to sitting in the back of the class. Didn't matter to the teachers, most likely, if they slept or not. Well, now, at least half of them are in the front half of the class.
Right.
And they are looking at a guy like John Morton Finney, who has 10 degrees and can speak 6 languages. And he's up there, and he is demanding more out of them than's ever been demanded of them before.
Right.
And he's not taking the excuses of, well, we're not expected to do well.
Right.
I'm sure it was very, very difficult, as a matter of fact, for those first few classes to just sort of make that transition. But then think about it. Think about what that does. What Addicts was about, it was about high expectations. It was about a lot of love and a lot of help and community, and the community and families got behind these amazing teachers. And the Addicts really did. I would certainly argue, and other historians, I'm not a historian, but historians would as well, that Addicts had the best faculty of any school at that point,
Right.
because these were people with masters and PhDs who, couldn't get a job anywhere else. A lot of them came up from the South.
Right.
Where the only job they could get was in historically black colleges, when that didn't pay hardly anything. Well, the first principal was able to recruit just this amazing faculty, and they challenged these kids. And you know what? Not every kid made it.
Right.
The first few years, especially, the graduation rate was lower than for other schools, and that was for a reason. These teachers were really, really tough. They knew that was the only way the school would eventually be taken seriously, and that was the only way for these kids really to learn. So I just think about, the courage it took, the resilience it took, in the face of just, segregation.
Right.
from so many other parts of society. I think it's a marvel. I think with
It was
that,
tough
it's
times.
nothing less
Yeah.
than a marvel
Yeah.
what happened there.
Yeah.
Congrats on having twin girls going off to college, Ted.
Yeah, thank you.
With your modern day lens in focus, what is your biggest takeaway from your involvement with the Crispus Attucks film in comparison to raising your girls?
Well, I was thinking about this. It just, these days we just take opportunity for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are going to grow up, they're going to go to school, they work hard enough, catch a few breaks here and there, they might be able to go to college and move on from there. But people need to remember that it wasn't that long ago that wasn't the case
Right.
for many people in society, certainly for the African American community. That just wasn't the case. And I used to, when I was in the heart of production for that documentary, I used to drive my kids once in a while around Crispus Attucks and around the neighborhoods and just sort of talk to them about, what people had to go through. And again, the resilience and the human spirit that existed. I just think that it stands as a monument, Attucks does, to what can happen when you throw open the doors and you let people come in for the first time and you give them a chance. And they just didn't just do okay at Attucks. They absolutely excelled. I mean, everybody talks about, again, the basketball team, and for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, the greatest legacies of Attucks are the military and the arts, and especially, without question, foremost, being education.
We'd like to close with our Bring It Home guest question. What is your why? And in particular, what has drawn you to be a storyteller of education history?
My sort of history, professional history, is covered in the sports field. And when I first started doing films, that's what I focused on. But I found myself that what I was really enjoying was not talking about, the sport itself, putting a ball in a basket or hitting a ball out of the park or whatever. But it was the triumph of the human spirit.
Right.
I did a film on a guy named Roger Brown, the very first Indiana Pacer. That's what I focused on. And one on Bobby Slick Leonard. Well, I will say I've never seen a bigger triumph of the human spirit than in the last two films I've been able to do. The first one being Crispus Attucks, and the film I just completed about a year ago was my late and very dear friend Eva Kor, the Holocaust survivor from Terre Haute.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't tell you how privileged I've been. Imagine how lucky I am to be able to look at examples of the human spirit like those. I just think what Attucks just brought hope. It brought opportunity. It showed the city and the state that, what, when given the chance, these black students are going to excel.
That's right.
And I honestly believe, I just love the irony of that. This is a school that's more or less, born certainly out of segregation, and yet it acted as a whole as an agent of change in a city that so desperately needed it. Still needs it today.
Amen.
Without question. But, Attucks went so far toward, helping toward the ultimate goal. And I just think that I was honored beyond words to be able to showcase that.
Well, we have been honored by you today, joining our little podcast and shedding some light on educational history, especially in the African American community and Attucks. And so we applaud you for your work. Keep doing the untold stories, the unseen stories, and shedding a light on the human spirit. And thank you for joining us today.
Chantelle, thank you so much. This has really been a pleasure.
We thank you, Ted.
Okay. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What an inspiring conversation.
I know.
And really, for me, the part that really sticks to me, thinking about the history of Crispus Attucks, thinking about the history of education in Indiana, Crispus Attucks was a school that, as Tupac Shakur said, a rose that grew out of the concrete.
Right.
So many inspiring stories, so many people felt the pride in the community in what was happening under very dire circumstances that really led them to look at the school, to look at their community with a new sense of hope.
What I keep coming to mind and how people are probably going to be like, what does this have to do with now, right? Is the quote, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been.
Absolutely.
And the whole choice movement stands on the shoulders of the people that stood and fought for Attucks to come about in a time when its own people didn't even want it. And I think in our current movement and current situation, the families and the communities that can benefit from choice the most are the ones with the least information,
Absolutely.
are the ones that may be being perceived to be fighting against it. But you're going to buck something that you don't understand. And no change comes without adversity. You know, the status quo is all you know. So why do I want to go for this thing that is unknown to me? And so I think that speaking with our next guest will definitely shed some light on why the current movement happened and what it was about and what was on the minds of the people that helped start it.
And I think to me also, what I've taken most away from Ted's conversation was the fact that there is a history in our state that we cannot deny. There was a systematic effort to make sure that folks of color, that were disadvantaged, were not even given the opportunity to enter
They
through
stayed
the door.
disadvantaged.
Absolutely. And also for how the period of time when we look at the history of our state and how long this systematic effort to keep folks down was around for was really mind-blowing for me to understand how close we are to that time period and how it's not far away from the conversations we're still having today.
For me, my mom was the graduate of the first segregated senior class in Fort Wayne. This is in the early 70s.
Right.
You know,
Right.
around the time you were being born.
Right.
So this is definitely very tangible and definitely within our lifetimes that desegregation in Indiana, well, northern Indiana, was the early 70s. And I don't think that people get how close we are to the Attucks time frame and what they started and how long it took for that desegregation to actually happen, because just because laws are passed doesn't mean they instantly come into effect, right?
Absolutely. And I think that that's really we're looking at through the lens of talking to our next guest and really trying to dig into why there was a need to create something that was different than what the traditional public school system was doing to serve what is now over 200,000 students within our state is really the interesting part to me. So I'm looking forward to our discussion with Betsy.
Joining us today, we have Betsy Wiley, who serves as the president and CEO of the Hoosiers for Quality Education and the Institute for Quality Education. Betsy is a proud graduate with an MBA from Butler University, and her bachelor's degree is from Miami University. Prior to joining IQE and HQE in January of 2013, Betsy served as Governor Mitch Daniels' Deputy Chief of Staff for 6.5 years and as the Director of Cabinet and Agency Affairs for the first 18 months of Daniels' administration. Betsy has also served on a number of community and governmental boards, including the White River State Park Commission and the Little Red Door Marion County Cancer Society. To add to Betsy's accolades, she was a member of the 1996-97 class of Richard G. Lugar Excellence in Public Service Series and has served on its board since 2005. Betsy was also a recipient of the Nancy Malloy Award for Public Service in 2010 and was named one of IBJ's 40 Under 40 in 2009. So with all of that said, we will jump in with Betsy on the call. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the accolades and introduction. A lot
Thank
to
you
live up to.
Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you for
us.
having me.
So we'll jump right into our questions, I guess. And what we want to know is, what do you think were the 2 or top 3 reasons the choice movement began in Indiana?
Great question. I really believe that, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, the United States was leading the world academically, and then we sort of started falling behind. Other countries started jumping ahead of us, and then in Indiana we were maybe in the middle of the pack in the United States, but when the United States was number 1, you kind of don't mind that. When you're in the middle of the pack and then the United States is falling behind, it gets a little more. And so I think there was a demand amongst parents and families for equal opportunity to access education for their students. A lot of innovative ideas were coming out in terms of charter schools and a number of things, and folks wanting to try something different for their kids. And so I really do think it came from families demanding more and better education for their students. Here in Indiana, I also think it was spurred for a second reason by a group of businessmen led by the late Pat Rooney, who was the leader of Golden Rule Insurance, but who recognized that, education is the great equalizer and it provides opportunities for, absolutely everyone to do whatever they want to do in life, and didn't see the fairness in that some families were able to obtain the education that they thought was best for their kid because they had the wealth to do so, maybe the wealth to send a child to a private school or the wealth to move to a public school corporation that they thought provided the best education. And then others didn't have access to those opportunities because they didn't have maybe the family income in order to move or to pay private school tuition or to afford transportation to a charter school or what have you. And I think they thought something needs to change there. Everybody should have, access to the best education for them.
A couple things that you said were parents were demanding more, and that the founders in the movement in Indiana really believed that education was the great equalizer. So, with that being said, in the choice movement, when did you see or feel that it had rounded third base or, was gaining ground, so to speak, that it wasn't just a thought or something that parents were demanding anymore, that it was a true, legit thing?
I think it probably, in some ways, I want to answer that maybe in 2011 and 2012, with the first years of the voucher program and major education reform package being passed at the state level, allowing for private school choice. And this, of course, came on the heels of in 2001, we had our first charter schools in Indiana. So, that could maybe be heading to first base when in the educational choice space. And 2009, we had the tax credit scholarship program put in place, as well as district to district choice become available. And maybe that's second base. And then you kind of, as you were suggesting, round third here with the voucher program being established in 2011 and 2012. But I also sort of feel like it's just been the last couple of years, right? We now have, over 200,000 students in the state of Indiana. Almost 20% of our students are choosing to get an education somewhere other than their neighborhood public school that they're kind of geographically assigned to.
Right.
And that's, finally this sort of larger number, this larger mass that makes you feel like, this movement is here to stay, and despite a lot of efforts, continual efforts to sort of roll back all these efforts, you know, it's here to stay. Parents want it, and it's going to continue to grow.
So, Betsy, referencing some of these dates that you talked about that were really relevant to the state of Indiana, 2001, 2009, 2011, a question that continues to come up now in 2019 when we're talking about the current movement is how do we continue to drive a sense of urgency and non-complacency in Indiana's movement of choice?
Oh my gosh, $1 million question, and so wish I had
Right.
like a $1 million answer.
We'll roll you an 8 ball and
Right?
just shake it
That's
for us.
exactly it. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. This is, in my opinion, a very personal movement. It is a very human movement, and it is about parents and families who are affected by educational freedom, who value it, expressing how important it is to them. There is no question that the opposition to continue to innovate in the education space and to allow folks from varied backgrounds, perhaps lower income or what have you, access to the same opportunities as maybe students from higher income families, there's that opposition will continue. And so the only sense of urgency I can suggest is, as in all things, if you sort of take something for granted, it starts to kind of get whittled away at, and eventually you don't even recognize it anymore, and it's not anything like what you originally had. And so it is just a constant challenge and a constant reminder to all of us involved in the movement to say we always need to talk about the successes and the importance that educational choice and educational freedom means to, over 200,000 students in Indiana.
So, with that, understanding how personal it is and that this is a movement that is solely dependent on the human capital because it's about our kids, right? That takes us right into what we call our bring it home guest question. So, how we would like to close out any interview that we do on our podcast is with this question. And that is, what's your why? What makes you continue to fight for choice?
Awesome question to end with. For me, it's very personal. Both of my parents are retired Indianapolis public school teachers. My grandma was a teacher. My aunt and uncles are teachers. So it's sort of the family business is education.
Right.
And it was always instilled in us how important an education was, how it was our key to our future. We could do anything with an education. But I've also seen the importance of choice in my family. So I have 6 nieces and nephews, and they have attended very different schools, a luxury that did not exist when my brothers and I were growing up, right? There was
Right.
a one size fits all education model, even though we didn't all learn the same. I have a nephew with Asperger's, and he attended public school for a while, and then, that became a not great environment for him to learn because of bullying and some other things. And so he went to a private school focusing on children with Asperger's and did great and graduated from high school and is now continuing his education at Ivy Tech. I have nieces that went to public school for a while, and then by the time I got to high school, the public school that they were going to go to was just too large and too overwhelming, and for them a smaller private school with some more individualized attention was what they needed, and smaller classroom sizes. And so for me, it's personal because I've seen how they flourish when they're in the right educational environment for them. They would have been fine in a traditional public school,
Right.
but they, grew beyond that because they were able to access, the educational environment that best met their needs. And it's just amazing to me, and I'm so grateful that we're in a space now where we're able to provide that as a state to all of our families.
Absolutely.
And fine doesn't equal excelling. Fine doesn't equal the next step. Fine is just passing, right? And that's not what you would want for your family, let alone
No,
the children of
right.
the state, right?
Exactly. Everybody wants better for their children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews than they had for themselves. Nobody wants to provide, the okay option, right? They want the very best.
Absolutely.
And, we're blessed to be in a state that has the policy in place to help our families access the very best in education for their kids. And so, I think that's what gets me out of bed every morning, is to make sure that all of our families know that whatever they think is best, we can help them get their student there.
Well, thank you for fighting for the best for our kids in the state, in the country, and for your continued service as Cesar and I's fearless leader. And well, thank you for your time, and just continue to do what you're doing. We appreciate you.
Thank you
Well,
for sharing, Betsy.
thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
As we conclude today on The Unseen, we shed light on the topic of the history of the movement. And we had our guests, Betsy Wiley and Ted Green, with us today. And we couldn't have been happier to have them. Community, we are going to close our show the same way we did in episode 1 with our foods for thought. So, Cesar, what do you have for us this episode?
So, considering our topic, I thought this was very appropriate. Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is the premise of progress in every society and every family, by Kofi Annan.
That's powerful.
It's amazing.
What spoke out to you the most about it?
It's really just education's ability to change your life.
Well, today, my closing food for thought is men make history and not the other way around. In periods where there is no leadership, society stands still. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. And that was said by President Truman. I think that could not be more fitting for history, especially when it comes to education.
Absolutely.
So with that, community, we will close episode 2. Join us again for episode 3, coming at you soon. And see ya.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you for joining The Unseen. Get involved. Find us at myschooloptions.org or on Facebook or Twitter.